Right?
So, Edward, I'm obviously really excited to talk about the film, but also, as we were just chatting about backstage, we both have a passion for environmental conservation and sustainability. So, I want to leave a little bit of time at the end for us to talk about that too, if that's okay with you.
Absolutely.
All right, fabulous. But, first to the film. So I know Motherless Brooklyn is based on the novel by Jonathan Latham, and I understand from my readings that you both were looking at making this into a film for over the course of about 20 years. So I was curious to hear about that journey of adopting this great novel for the film, and sort of how did you get to this place with this beautiful film today?
It's when people say, "Oh, you've been working on it 20 years," I want to be accurate and say, like, I read the book 20 years ago.
Fair enough.
And it was everything that the film became in its scope and its vision was not. It was not a high-minded impulse when I read the book. It was purely a greedy actor going. That's a great part, and I want it for me. Like I want that gig. Like that's hard. The Jonathan's book, it's sort of it's almost like a latter-day Holden Caulfield. It's
Totally.
You're inside his mind. The way you hook into the character it's because you're inside the mind of this guy who's a real hot mess because he's got Tourette syndrome and obsessive compulsive disorder, and he's just like he's smart and sensitive, but he's a complete his condition is very chaotic and funny and painful, and it's the whole experience of the book is riding the mind of this guy navigating his mind, and I think in a funny way I think we all relate to that because we all know we're crazy in a way. Like we know what really goes on in there. We know the crazy looping obsessions that we've all got. We know like that if the voice in our head was yelling some of the things that we're thinking out loud, it would be real trouble, And he's it. He's like what we're terrified we'd be like if a few synapses more were off. And so Jonathan's book does what everybody tries to do in literature or film or music. It's the hook, right? It's this instant emotional identification hook, and when you hook someone like that, you can go anywhere, And I think that's and all I thought really in the beginning was what a great character, and then I talked to him about it, and we kind of I told him I wanted to get the rights to it and all that, but I was making Fight Club, and then I was going to direct a film, and then be in another film, and I knew it was going to be years, and I almost thought like, well, maybe it'll fade, but it kept rattling around in my head, that character. And then it went through a phase where I actually got focused on it, but I realized that it's this very interior experience, and films obviously are a bigger canvas. They're music and picture, and well, how do you take that and make it bigger? And the book has it's in the 90s, but it's a very 50s feel. It has a genre feel to it, and Jonathan's a big film fan, and I said, I know it sounds weird, but what if we set it in the 50s? Yeah. Just to give ourselves a little bit, because in the book they call him Freak Show, and you kind of go, would people really be doing that in the 90s? And we decided we liked the idea of making it like a true noir in some sense, not being ironic. And then once we did that, it opened up this gateway on, not just because the 50s in New York are a very rich time. There was very, very dark things going on in the 50s in New York, sort of. If Chinatown's the story of LA stealing its water, and that being the original sin in some ways of LA, New York's original sin has to do with what took place in a lot of ways in the 50s that really defined the problems of modern New York. And I think we started talking, and we just decided, let's open it out and use Lionel as a vehicle for opening up into these larger themes than are in the book. And thank God Jonathan's just he's a really great artist, and he loved the idea of springboarding and going wider and all of it. And so that was why it took a while.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. And I know I was really struck because I had read the book many years ago, to see it sort of brought to life in the 1950s. And I know, you're a New Yorker, and I believe a lot of the actors in the film are New Yorkers, and it feels like, in a way, it is a love letter to New York, but in another way, it's really getting at some of that underbelly. And I know, we were just talking about Enterprise, the foundation that your grandfather started, that you're a trustee of, all focused on affordable housing. How did you think about that motivation to bring some of these issues in New York, about New York and equity and affordable housing, into this plot? And did your work that you do off screen kind of influence that?
For sure. I think, but it's funny because there's the things you're interested in life, but, and this applies to sort of my interest in environmental stuff too. People say, "Why don't you make a movie about environmental sustainability?" And even I go, snooze, like,
I would love it.
right. Although, because so there's the things we all work on. There's the complexity of life. There's documentaries and books and there's films, right? And narrative films have to function in a different way. They polemics don't tend to. I'm not even talking about in a box office way. I'm just saying, like, art. When art polemicizes, it tends to become like what Joseph Campbell said was like opaque to people. It's like you're talking at them. You're not creating a transparency where they see themselves in it. If people see themselves in something, it lands much deeper, I think. And I think Avatar. I think what Jim Cameron did is actually the most genius move. If you want to talk about environmental values and values of sustainability, he created a mythic story in which being part of the extractive industrial world is awful, and being integrated is great. In his integration, you're in 3D, right? You want to be there, and it's a very visceral. He achieved great mythic visceral experience because you want to be a Navi. You don't want to be like, Giovanni Ribisi and the raping like machines, like killing the trees, right? I think I was interested in some the things that happen in New York, not just in housing, but just the way that we tell ourselves stories in America about what, who we are, what our value system is, how the system works. And one of the things that's been great about noir films at their best is that they peel the corner back and say there's a shadow narrative that's going on all the time in American life, in which power is accumulating in places that we didn't put it and where it's not supposed to be, and things are happening that are affecting us. And the thing I love about the noir detective, whether it's Bogart or Nicholson or whatever, is that they're not really moralists. They're not crusaders. They're certainly not polemicists, right? They're kind of like operators. They're very American. They're doing their job and making a buck, and they're not really out there on the barricades. But as they start to poke into the shadow story, they get more and more irritated at what they find, and they kind of become us. They're that part of us that goes, look, I'm trying to just live my life, but I'm starting to get the sense that someone's trying to put something over on us, and it's making me mad. And I think that makes those films very American. It's a very American impulse to say, hang on a second, if what you're doing in the shadows is getting really antagonistic to the rest of us, we're, like Nicholson says, how much is enough? We're gonna start to say there's a line here that we won't tolerate, and I like that. But you got to find a great way to tell that story, right? And the thing is that I thought this Tourettic detective was a really interesting way, because I think you root for an underdog, and when you're rooting for an underdog, you'll go a long way with them. You'll get lost happily, and you can get into some of these bigger ideas about the consequences of of not seeing the ways in which the system we think we're living in is being corrupted.
Yeah. And sort of on your character, Lionel, who I thought was so beautifully drawn. And as you said, he's a detective. He also has Tourette syndrome and obsessive compulsive disorder. Obviously, a very complex part. How did you prepare for that? How did you get yourself into that character?
It's not rocket science. I mean, in the sense that you're not, you know, Tourette syndrome is not something that's not well documented, right? So there's Oliver Sacks's book, and there's at least 2 really good documentaries, and it's not hard. I know I have a friend who's a corporate litigator in New York who has Tourette's. The thing that Lionel does of sort of stretching his neck and jaw compulsively is what my friend does. Most people don't even think he has Tourette's. He just they think he's got a kink in his neck, and you know, you just have to. It's like a clinical. It's like an external clinical investigatory kind of process, and then you've got to work on it in a way to make it to decide creatively, like, what's the grab bag of manifestations of it in this character, because Tourette's expresses itself in very individualistic ways. No one has the exact same grab bag of physical twitches, vocal twitches, compulsive behaviors. It's very, very creative in the way it expresses itself in people. And so you know, I took things from one person I met and things from another person, and there's, you know, the character has when he's feeling connected to someone, he has a compulsion to tap their shoulder in a rhythmic way, and there was an NBA player named Chris Jackson who talks about that. You can actually see in the NBA game films when he's guarding someone, he's doing 1 1 2 1 2 3 on their shoulders. It's really, and I love that, because I thought that's sweet. That's not just destabilizing. That's actually him connecting. So you work it together, and you rehearse it, and you have to kind of get it into the intuitive place, so that you can perform it. But it's just as important to kind of deal with. What's trickier is really more you don't want to reduce a character to the condition, right?
Yeah.
That's to me the hallmark version of a thing is like, this person has cerebral palsy, so they're a hero. It's like, no, what's interesting is more the Jim Sheridan, Daniel Day-Lewis version of that, which is, yes, this person had cerebral palsy, but he resisted. He was a poet. He was a drinker, a son of a bitch. He was very lusty. He's a fully complex human being who also himself has to grow up and learn to be kind, you know, and that's why that's a great performance. Not because he does a terrific job manifesting the physical, you know, affliction that he lives within, but because he creates a portrait of a complex human being, and I think a lot of this one, it was actually, I wrestled less with how do you portray Tourette's, and more with the idea that's sort of expressed in Tom York's song, that like you can get down inside your own daily battles to such a degree, you kind of give yourself a pass on responsibility for the wider world, you know, and that's problematic if we're not all, whether you have Tourette's or not, kind of lifting your head up and going, there's stuff going on. I've got to be a part of the fight. Then we're lost, you know. And I think I like the idea that he has to grow up. He can't be. He's got to become his boss and step out of his comfort zone. But he's actually got to go further. And if he wants to, you know, if he wants to be around someone like her, he can't be passive.
Yeah.
And I think that's more, figuring out how to shape that story is more difficult than figuring out how to like twitch and shout.
Yeah, yeah. And so you brought up the role of music, which I feel like the film has a beautiful score, and music plays a really important role, specifically jazz music. I'd love to hear more about, obviously that was a piece of setting it in the 50s, but how did you think about that choice and the role that jazz music played sort of throughout the narrative and for your character?
Yeah, I mean, the experience, again, part of the reason these things take time and have to gestate is, the best things are always people throwing in what interests them, right? But sometimes those mashups, they aren't sort of formulaic, right? So I had a lot of mashup. I'm saying, you know, it's a little bit Rain Man and a little bit Chinatown, and people's eyes just go it's like two great tastes that taste great together. Like people are not buying that's peanut butter and chocolate. They're like Rain Man and L.A. Confidential. Like I don't get like what, you know. And then on the music level, I was sort of saying like it's like Radiohead and Wynton Marsalis, and people were like, I love them both. I don't think they go together. Like, and that's when you just start getting like, you have to find people who are on the same wavelength, and on some ways you have to make this bet like that you can create novel, interesting, original things in these integrations that don't seem obvious. And I you know, I like so many, I'm a huge Radiohead fan. I've known Tom a long time. I said to him, I felt like his voice was very, to me, he mashes up a lot of what's going on in Lionel's head. It's like longing and sensitivity, but that kind of that fracture and dissonance that comes in their music, but also that's a part of Lionel's landscape is dissonance. And I wanted something that was not just what I would call period cliche. So I sort of said to Tom initially, like, you know, I said I love that Billie Holiday song "Strange Fruit" because it's mournful, but it's also very political. It's about living in the oppression of dark times, much more than most jazz. It's got a more political bent. Yeah. And I said to Tom, like, pretend you're Billie Holiday, and I said I want something that's like feels like it's plucked from the past. And so he wrote that song. And then for the jazz in the club, I had Wynton Marsalis giving me a lot of good counsel on what would have been played at that time, and we were sort of selecting not just tracks we liked, but what fit the moment. Like what should they open with so that the beginning of their date in a way is fun, that it's starting to open up, that it's starting to feel fun, what has like a party atmosphere to it. And then when he's getting drunk and it's getting a little bit edgy, what has sort of strangeness and dissonance. But when they dance, we were worried that there'd be a distractedness if it was like someone to watch over me, it'd be like thud, you know, that's pretty obvious, and you'd hear the words in your head. So I said, Wynton, what if you took Tom's song and you arranged it as if it was a Miles Davis ballad in '57? And so that's what he did, and that's what's playing there. And that way, people, when they're watching the moment, they're not just, it's something subliminal. It's like, why do I know this? You know, but a lot of people don't pick up that it's the same piece. And as those things start to happen, you start to go, this is working. You know what I mean? Because you're fusing things in interesting ways, and then when we went back to Tom's song, we heard what Wynton did, so we went and put horns and bass into his song so that it has the language of jazz, and suddenly you've got like a landscape. It's like I remember when I was a kid and I saw Chariots of Fire, right? No, it's a 1920s running movie. Right, it's a 1920s film, and the opening musical pad is this synth score and drum going, and you never forgot it. Totally, it was like this instant, like, whoa, that's so great, like that. Why does that work, you know? And I think you have to chase those things that set a thing apart from the cliche, and I think the music in this. The music in this is really, really pretty terrific. It's a group of geniuses who kind of mashed up their talents together, and I really like what we came out with.
I love hearing you talk about the moment when Lionel and Laura Rose are dancing, because to me that was one of the most beautiful moments in the film, and seeing her sort of putting her hand on his head, which we know was how his mother comforted him before she passed away. That was such a beautiful moment in the film. So, we've talked about this complex character that you played, but of course, not only did you write this and adapt it for the screen, but also you were directing, and you brought together this incredible group of artists, Willem Dafoe, and many others. How did you think about balancing that in front of the camera, behind the camera, directing this incredible group of artists all at the same time?
Well, in some ways, the thing you're right, the collaborators is part of your buffer. That's the airbag you're putting around the difficulty of the double duty, right? And I think that not just the cast, but the crew, like the guy who shot the film, Dick Pope, he's one of the great living cinematographers. Dick's he shot all of Mike Leigh's films.
You did The Illusionist with him,
I did The
right?
Illusionist
Yeah,
with him,
movie,
and honestly, The Illusionist is a lot of fun. I think it works. 70% of the reason it works is Dick's photography. I think, and Philip Glass's score. I think if you took those two things away, the whole thing might break down. I really do. I
will
really
disagree.
do.
I love that movie, but
I think you love it. I think you love it because I think we all think we love it because it's a magic trick. But the magic trick is not like it's this hypnosis.
Yeah.
That a film achieves a hypnosis effect, which is not unrelated in a way to things we talked about with this film, because you're gonna in a noir film you're gonna get lost, just like in The Illusionist. You're like, wait, what is going on? You know what I mean? Yeah. The mistake is thinking that adult audiences want to be ahead of a movie. Nobody wants to be ahead of a movie. They want to be behind it. They want to get lost, but getting lost and being happy, there's getting unhappily lost and there's getting happily lost. And getting happily lost is that thing that happens where a thing begins and there's something about the photography and the music and the clothes and the actors and their seriousness, and there's like a switch that goes click in your brain and you go, this is all right. This all looks great and it's working and I'm happy to be here. And wherever it takes me, I'm less concerned with exactly what's happening and more with just the feeling of being in this. And I think that I don't remember what happens in LA Confidential to this day. I have no idea. I remember the experience of the film, going, oh man, this is not a diorama. This is like we are in it. Like and it's a great feeling. But Dick had done that. He had done all of Mike Leigh's films, and when you have people around you like that and a cast like this, I went to, with the exception of Gugu, who's English, everybody in it was are people I've come up in New York theater with or revered, like Cherry Jones and Willem, and many of the people in the film I have 20-year history with, either working in films or in theater, but almost all New York actors. And I think you feel that. You feel we had to make the movie on a price. I don't get 200 from Netflix. I don't get 200 million from Netflix. I hope one day to get the Scorsese deal. But until then, it was like, we'll give you a tenth of that. And you have to make like a big film. And all of those everybody in the cast, from Bruce Willis on down, did the film for scale, for me, for no money, and that's how we were able to do it. So in addition to their talent, the cast literally helped me get the film made, and then being actors who come out of a theater background, the only way you can make a film like this fast is if you have actors who are used to the experience of theater, where an actor has a primary responsibility for the text, like the whole text, right? They're not leaning on the crutch of the cut. They're coming in with the whole thing understood and kind of the language of it, the totality of it. And when you have people like that, you can blaze. You can really move and get big, meaty chunks of work done. And Alec Baldwin is a great example of it, because he's, for all of Alec's comedic and satirical gifts, he's a really great dramatic actor. And when I came up, he was doing Streetcar Named Desire on Broadway, and taking a role that Marlon Brando had made definitive and completely annihilating it, just like fantastic. And I knew with the that soliloquy in the pool at the end, it's a Shakespearean actor's kind of a challenge. I needed someone with a gift for language, for the synthesis of complex ideas, and he did that in 2 or 3 passes at it, and we were done.
Wow.
And it's
that's such a great scene.
Yeah,
too.
and that's how literally actors like that can make it possible to do something big and complex on a relatively small schedule, because they come ready.
Totally. All right, I have one more question about the film, and then I want to save a little time to talk about the environment. So, you talked about the immersion experience of a film like this, and that was something that I really appreciated, that I felt like you took your time and took us on a journey, and I think the film is about a little under 2.5 hours, and I kind of loved that. But I know we're living in this time of, bingeable shows and action movies. How did you think about sort of making this kind of noir period piece in this moment, and really sort of giving yourself that space and that canvas to have a longer film?
Yeah, well, I mean, our credits are really long, so no. So actually, I think from the start of the film till like the cut to black at the end's like 2:18. So it is shorter than Star is Born.
Significantly.
Yeah, and I don't know. Quentin's movie is 2:50. Get ready for The Irishman, because that's now 3.5, and I hear it still might be getting longer. I don't know. But look, I mean, The Godfather's 3 hours and 15 minutes long, and Reds is 3 hours, and you're talking about like my favorite movies are in that kind of configuration. But also, honestly, I mean, the Avengers Endgame is 3 hours too. So I mean, I don't want friction for 2:18 on a if fast food can be 3 hours and 15 minutes, then hopefully a good meal, a nutritive meal people can handle but actually, what's funny is you talk about binge. I think lots of the things people say about the change in the world and Netflix and streaming and all these things being, somehow antagonistic to the theatrical film experience, I just don't agree with any of it. I think if anything, binge TV is reinforcing the underlying truth that people like length. Yeah. They're not looking for. I love Fleabag too. That works great short, But I don't think people's mental musculature for longer stories is decreasing. I think it's increasing because of the embrace and the new the more robust offering of complex long form stories. Right? I think people are. I actually think people have always been into them if they're good, and I think that's happening. And I've said too. I don't agree that intrinsically there's anything less theatrical about what Netflix did with Roma, which very few studios would have ever invested the amount they invested in the theatrical release of that film. A black and white Spanish language film doesn't get treated in theatrical releases like they did. So this idea of like an antagonism between these things, I don't agree with. I think there's what I think is what I actually do agree with is that if we're young people, like if we're only feeding people high fructose corn syrup laced with Xanax, then we're training people to be passive. Yeah. I balk more at the idea that sit back, plug into the matrix like a copper top and accept that you don't have to do anything. Like you don't have to. It's not only that you don't have to save the world. You don't have to think at all. Like we're going to opiate you for a given amount of time, and that's just not what we need.
No.
Right now, and I don't. And it's actually not what I needed either when I was a kid. Like when I think when I think of like the impact that like Do the Right Thing had on me when I was 18 years old, we need we need activation. Like people need activation, and they need that sense of transparency and going, this is not giving me answers. This is insisting that I think about, what's going on here. And I think more than anything, like, we need audiences to reinforce, it's that thing. It's like we're gonna get more of what we go to.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And in some measure, I worry about the negative feedback loop of just like things that are essentially like passive and nihilistic, becoming viewed as like the best things to make because the most people show up for them.
Yeah, absolutely. So you have been engaged in environmental activism and conservation for a long time, and obviously a topic we share a lot of passion for. I'd love to hear, how did you get interested in this initially? Where did this passion come from?
Well, you know my dad.
I do.
Yeah.
Who's a great environmental lawyer.
I was indoctrinated,
Makes sense.
Yeah, I'm like they talk about kids who went to socialist summer camps when they were like I happily I grew up with my dad's Greek pantheon was John Muir and Ed Abbey and David Brower, and that really was like where his that to him was those were the great heroes.
Yeah.
Of and we were all lucky. My brother and sister and I grew up outdoors with my dad, working for the Park Service in college, and he was he was in the Marine Corps. He was a corporate litigator. He was U.S. attorney for Maryland. But by the 80s, he had gone over fully into being an environmental litigator, basically like doing suing James Watt and the worst EPA and Interior Department until recently. I think one would not believe that you could have a more regressive national environmental policy than we had under Reagan, but we've done it. And I think, but he cut his teeth. A lot of what you'd call the modern environmental litigation strategy, that wasn't that wasn't how people fought for in the 70s and the 60s. It was a much more spiritual, it was an invocation to the spiritual value of nature. And by the 80s, it was like, we have to sue these assholes. Like they're, and I think a lot of, NRDC, Earth Justice, the great infrastructure we have now for environmental litigation grew up under people like my dad. Yeah. And that's, where it all comes from for me.
That makes a lot of sense. And, how do you think about, we already talked about this a little bit, but the role of Hollywood, the role of media? You pointed out Avatar as a great film that actually really sort of, brings these themes in, but you said you would find it a snoozer if you made a film that was about these issues. What is the role of media? How do you think that Hollywood and the, entertainment industry can help build awareness, wake people up, get people engaged?
Yeah, it's tricky. It's very tricky. I think it's beyond Hollywood. I think that we're in this, we're long past the moment of rational acknowledgement of what is going on. Yeah. Like long past it, and it's nothing less than an existential challenge. I mean, one could argue that the nuclear, the moment of threat of nuclear war was a fairly existential kind of confrontation with how our capabilities literally could end life as we know it. But this is maybe even bigger, in the sense that we have recognized that we have the capacity to dismantle the ecological stability that, it's not that the planet won't continue. Yeah. But the ecological framework in which we exist comfortably, we are capable of putting it on tilt, and we are, and I think it's it's way beyond media. It's way beyond. It's like this collective. We need a collective we need a collective communication amongst each other at every dimension of society. We need it in political conversation. We need it in corporate conversation. We need it in, in education. We need it in entertainment per se. But we really, I think it needs to be. It needs to be so pervasive that it's conversation number one, priority number one, that we're voting it as issue number one, that we have total intolerance for political or corporate leadership that is acting antagonistically to that agenda, and that we're voting with our dollars, that we're voting, in our elections, and that we're communicating relentlessly about it, because I think it's astonishing that we have political leadership in this country today that's daring to stand in front of a microphone and shine off a girl who's sailed across the world to talk about this. It's vile. It's approaching. It's approaching sort of the vileness of Holocaust deniers. It's people who are literally, like, for the most craven of reasons, dismissing children and their concern for their future, for the shortest term dead ender financial maximizations, and it's nothing less than that. And I think we're having all these other conversations that are important, but all of our geopolitical and cultural squabbles are like people at a dinner table while their house is burning and falling on their head. It's pretty stupid. Mm-hmm. We're gonna look really stupid to the people in the future, and I think everybody's got to be doing everything possible.
Yeah. So you were saying how with Motherless Brooklyn, that was a book that stayed with you through the years. Are there any other examples of books or movies that have really stuck with you that you want to pursue further?
That's a good question. Yeah, there's one of my favorite American writers is this guy Mark Halperin, and his book A Soldier of the Great War is, I think, one of the great novels of the last 50, 60 years. Yeah. It's magnificent. To your point, we kind of have concluded. I've been working on it with a director named Cary Fukunaga. It's not something I would direct. It's something more we're producing. But it's been years and years we've been thinking about this one and trying to wrangle it into. We've been working on it since before there were streaming services, and part of the challenge is it's like War and Peace. It's a truly enormous novel, and what we've come happily to is we can't make this as a film. This shouldn't be a film. This needs to be a lot. And Cary he's directing the new Bond film. He's a great filmmaker, but he also made Maniac on Netflix, this great series, right. And he did the original True Detective. So he's a filmmaker who's like, let's make it this way, let's make it that way, and I think we're looking at that one as a long form opportunity. So that's probably the book that I've been thinking about the most of late.
Fabulous. Other questions right here.
So American History X was one of my favorite movies. If there's anything from the process of making that movie that sticks with you to this day.
From the process, I think well, I mean, I my friend David, who wrote the original script, and then we worked on it together for like half a year. The funny thing is our thought at the time was, not to sound highfalutin, but we were sort of like, well, what's great about like Othello and Macbeth and they're tragedies, right? They're tragedies, and they have these very heightened characters who are in some ways larger than life. They're not like peons. They're generals, and they're things, and they have all these great qualities. And then they have kind of the classic, as we learn in college, tragic flaw, right? But that idea of of a prescriptive lesson for an audience by really honing in on what's the damage that comes from hubris or from jealousy or whatever, right? And David and I thought he had this very, you know, great observation, which is just like anger is a really interesting thing to explore. Full stop. That the destructive capacity of anger, the way it can reverberate and pollute and ruin the potential in your life, all the positive potential. And his basic idea was this guy, it was someone who is like Othello. He's not, you know, he's a, or like Macbeth, he's a person full of enormous capabilities and is smart and loves his family and all these things. But rage has just toxified his life. And ultimately it destroys it. It causes real destruction. And I love that idea. I just thought that was a great idea. The idea was not initially skinheads, or I mean it was, but what the point wasn't skinheads or white supremacy or anything. It was rage, and it was sort of like, well, and it was literally like, what's a really powerful sort of heightened version of that? And it was like, well, look at, you know, this is almost like, yeah, it's marginal, but it's like very ferocious, you know. And what was wild is we sort of thought, you know, well, skinhead culture at the time, it was so marginal, you know what I mean? And it's like now it's like you'd have to make American History X in like Dockers and a plaid shirt with a hard part comb over. It's like, wait, what? This has gone mainstream? You know, that I think that the most shocking thing is like we were like, well, let's find something marginal, you know, so heightened that it's marginal or whatever, terrifying. But I think what was shocking to people at the time was that it was like a marginal kind of fringe thing, but what was coming through it, you know, that's what we tried to engineer, was a kind of a disconcerting rationality almost to his capability of articulating. And the fact that that's gone mainstream is really hard to believe. It's that's not the direction you'd have thought things would travel between 98 and 2018, you know. I don't remember. I mean, there's things about making it that you forget. I can't remember. I mean, I have really fun. I remember there's that scene, the famous scene of him, you know, killing the guy in the street and turning in those super slow motion shots and everything. And people always talk about that. Sometimes you see clips of that and everything. And I swear, like, one of the memories I have of that is we had one of the greatest first assistant directors. He was really funny. And we always, you know, you have cop cars coming in, you have gunshots going off. We had gangbangers, Crips and Bloods coming in to find out what was going on in their neighborhood, like who was firing off. And then we were like, we're just making a movie. It's all good. Hang out, watch with us, you know. So I'm not exaggerating. When we shot that scene, we had like significant contingents of Crips and Bloods, like hanging out, kind of like going, oh, this is dope. You know what I mean? Like watching it, like being very supportive, like asking us if we needed help with security, like all these things. And we, but we're doing this very intense thing, and I remember this guy, Mark going like, okay, like live fire, cue the cop car, cue Edward, cue the raccoon family. Wait a minute, no, that's wrong. Because like right as the cop cars were coming around and the bodies lying there, this mother raccoon and 4 babies walked across the street in the middle of the shot. Like we've set up these high-speed, slow-motion cameras, and it's like everything's finally ready. We do the first take, and like a little raccoon family walks through the middle, and like, so when I see it, I hear Mark going like, "Cue the raccoon family!" Lights, cut.
My name is Rama. I'm from Kenya. Hi, Ed. So I just have a bit of a double-barrel question. So the first thing, I watched Mother's Brooklyn yesterday. It was really, really cool. I thought it was nice how you took the time to sort of be slow-paced and just like thoroughly take someone into your world, which I think is something that's missing in a lot of cinema right now. So well done on that.
Thank you.
And the other thing was I've been noticing. So, for example, I'm from Kenya, and in Nigeria, sort of Nollywood has been sort of up and coming bit by bit. I mean, still a little bit scattered, but it's on its way up. I just wanted to check if you have or are already sort of involved in any investments in cinema abroad outside of the US and what that looks like.
Um, it, within a few years of working in movies, I think I wrote above my computer somewhere, never invest $1 in the movie business. Like, I've made lots of investments in my life and these things, but movies, I have never, I always liked being on the receiving end of the economics of films, and I think that so I have never been. I've been an entrepreneur in things to do with data science around media data and stuff, but I've never been I've never been much of an entrepreneur in terms of like film business models. I do think that that China is the obvious lead example. We're definitely seeing like markets like are becoming more and more mature in other parts of the world. Bollywood, obviously, like you said, the Nigerian film business is really becoming the hub of African film, not just obviously not Nigerian film. If you're anywhere in Africa and you're seeing content on the things, it's generally coming out of Lagos, right? But which is fascinating, and not dissimilar in a way to the way the American film business built out there in the desert in Hollywood. It was like it wasn't it wasn't it was on the fringe. It wasn't where you would think the Dream Factory would be. But I think that one of the conundrums, I think, for developing world film markets is just simply, we've seen it in China. The Chinese domestic market is now producing sometimes the biggest box office returns of any global market.
Wow.
on a month by month basis, just off things, and they're building theaters at an extraordinary rate and stuff like that. But Chinese language content is not generally still succeeding in crossing over into being global successes. And it's a really interesting question. Like, why is it? Because like English is the de facto kind of lingua franca of more of the world, and therefore audiences just are more comfortable with that as like the base plate content, because it's not like terrific films aren't getting made all over the world, but so it's a little bit mysterious. I think it's not just because they're Chinese companies with fantastic distribution capability now, and they have partnerships in the U.S. It's an interesting thing. What is it that makes some things that are made in some countries not travel in the rest of the world? It's hard to say. I think it's but it's gonna get, if you look at all the ways that the system is being atomized and people are finding ways to end run the system, and I mean really literally from Chance the Rapper to podcasts to Netflix to what it's like there's so many things are happening that are creating really exciting direct conduits. I mean, we're sitting talking. You guys work at a place that, if we cut to even our own young adult lives, like the notion of distributed information at the level, it's just impossible. So the same thing's going to happen in content. I think we will get to this phase where content produced in all kinds of places is much more global than it even is now, and it's kind of exciting to think like what will be what will be something that will just break out. It'll come from Nigeria, and something will get made. Some young person will break away from the sort of soap opera style shooting, low grade video. Someone will do a Steven Soderbergh in Lagos and make a film on an iPhone, and it'll break out, and it'll be one of these things that goes all around the world, and it'll be very exciting.
Fabulous. Edward Norton, it's been such a pleasure having you. Thank you so much for joining us here for Talks at
Thanks, guys.
Google.